Well, hey, everybody. I am Mark Fields, and this is the Kinship Collective. We are ending otherness. We want to build solidarity by celebrating our stories and reimagining scripture together. Today, we have with us
Yeah.
from Austin by way of Los Angeles, by way of Colorado, an incredibly inspiring and warm and present human being who has done her work to kind of show up well in the world, which has been a gift to millions and trillions and billions of humans. She's Brit Barron.
What? The crowd goes wild.
Crowd noise came from 2019.
Yeah.
There are no crowds in
Yeah.
2021.
Synthetic crowds.
Yeah.
Wow, what an intro.
It was decent. I didn't talk
Yeah.
about some of the beautiful things you've put into the world. I think for me, when I think of who you are and how you show up, um, I think of winsome as a word that I love that word because it means you're so okay in your skin, in your story.
Hmm.
You've done the work to own your story in a way that allows other people to like, oh, I can own mine. And to
Yeah.
me, that feels like what this book is all about.
Oh,
Worth it.
snap.
Come on. Hold up. Don't do it too. Don't do
Oh,
the
with that side copy.
um to me, what I love about this book. So more about Brit. I'm just going to push you. If you want to learn more about Brit, go to britbarron.com and you'll find all kinds of links to all kinds of wonderful resources. Another one outside of this book that I've used is her Racism 101 workshop, which is a really helpful, again, it's grounded in her winsomeness, invitation into understanding some of the stories of how we got to racism now and some of the ways that we can get away from it or do our work to be anti-racist now. So you can find all that at britbarron.com. But Brit, I feel like I've talked so much already, but worth it. To me, worth it feels like
Hmm.
back to that invitation to live from your truest place.
Yeah.
Uh, I love worth it for several reasons. One is it comes from a person who has spent her life learning and speaking and doing the work to get to the core of things. So worth
Hmm.
it to me feels like there are other books that maybe feel like they may say worth it in there or their whole idea may be worth it. But this book, which is not in frame,
Hmm.
this book feels like you've done the work, you've done the whys. So you've done like the 6 whys to the core of like, how come that was an issue? Or how come that relationship is an issue? Or how come it's really hard to show up? And deep down, have you done the work to own your story, to remember that you are worth it and that
Yeah.
there will be difficulty along the way. So maybe that's the more complete version of an intro.
Yeah, I know. Yes.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
how do you feel about Worth It now that it's been out for almost a year?
Oh my gosh, I know. Isn't that wild? I feel amazing about it. It's so funny. I was just on a podcast yesterday and I was talking about Worth It and all the reasons I wanted to write it and kind of like you said in the beginning, it's the reason I decided to write it was after having this experience that felt super isolating. Like I was this closeted mega church pastor. And like how many closeted mega church pastors are there in the world, right? Probably more than we all think. But it still felt like kind of like a unique experience. But being able to go through that, share that story, and then have people circle back and be like, oh my gosh, that reminded me of how I felt when X or Y or Z or all these moments. And I was like, oh, it's not that being a closeted megachurch pastor was a unifying moment. It was feeling trapped in the expectations that and the worldview and the framework that someone else had set for you and wanting to go out of that. That's the connector. And that's the reason I wanted to write it, because I was like, you may not have had this exact experience, but you have had this experience, right? Like you have felt this way. And what's interesting is yesterday I was saying that like um, you get to this place where you go through something really difficult like that, and you overcome all these things, and you think like, I did it, I did it. Wow, And my wife, Sammy, she always uses this analogy of like our issues or our core, whatever, like they're always there, and they're like at the bottom of the spiral staircase. And so like we keep circling back to them just from different vantage points. And so it's just funny to like be in a season now where there's still like I'm still working on that. And it's from a different vantage point, but I'm still like, "Oh my god, I still care about this. I thought I didn't I'm not done." Right? I have a different vantage point, but I'm like still so in it. And so I love the book for that reason because I don't it's not about getting to a place where you have no fear anymore. It's about getting to a place where you can begin to see your fear at every season from a different vantage point, right? And that helps us along the journey.
Mm. I love that. I feel like I remember I maybe had like 3 spiritual direction sessions. They
Mhm.
were fairly disappointing. I probably should revisit it. But
Uh-huh.
one of them was that she talked about some of the things that we would encounter, and I think Sammy's perspective makes a little bit more sense to me because it's just there. Those root When you talk about the experience you had with friends when you're younger, these hallmark seasons and stories, they mark our
Mhm.
lives. They don't go anywhere, and we hold them and we take them with us. But I
Mhm.
love that perspective of like, no matter how I evolve and grow upwards, like when I look down or when I look back or when I look within, those
Mhm.
root things are still there. That's why I love the title Worth It, because
Yeah.
that issue is a root for a lot of people, and it plays itself out in different ways, trying to earn our worth, achieve our worth.
Mhm.
And and at the base of all that, it's like look down the staircase. And what's crazy is that you can be 70 years old and not made much headway up the staircase, like not done much work to like have a different vantage point or evolve.
Yeah. It's not just about age, and that's right. I think we all know that as we like get into our mid, late, wherever you are in your 30s. But like I used to think that like you just hit this point in adulthood and maturity is like comes with it. And I'm like, "Oh, maturity is something you choose. You can choose it at 14, you can choose it at 35, you can choose it at 60. You could also not choose it at 14. You can not choose it at 35. And you can not like you if you want to sit your behind down on the first step of that staircase and just pack a lunch and refuse to move, it's not about your time, here on this earth. That gives us certain vantage points, but you can choose to be a part of this process or not. And that's the core thing I feel like that I try to say a million ways in this book and in my life is I'm not saying, "Oh, it's super easy. Just like walk up the stairs and it's super chill and they're not high or steep or scary at all." Like that's not the message. And it's not easy to sit down and not evolve either. Like being a human is hard. It's going to be hard. And so you have to choose the kind of hard that you want it to be. Do you want it to be the kind of hard that's going to lead you towards maturity, healing, wholeness, transformation, growth? Or do you want to choose the kind of hard that's going to just keep you like as tight as you can within someone else's expectations? They're both hard, right? And one is worth it, right? Which was eventually how we got to the title. As I was like, I'm not saying it's easy, I'm just saying it's worth it.
I love that. And I think for me, one of the advantages again of this book, for me, when I think about these things, I get like high level, and I don't get distinct enough. Back to what you talked about,
Mm,
it's like, oh yes, I understand that I'm worth it. Or I do some Enneagram reading and I'm like, oh, these are some base da da da's.
mhm.
But what you did in the book was you communicated that we're worth it, that it is worth it, and then you laid out some of your own life's kind of hurdles and some of those situations that were invitations to like, do I evolve? Do I continue to high? It was like you're talking about the steps. So it's like, this is where I
Yeah.
took a step and this is where I took a step. But that was the beauty, because not only was it wrapped in a story, but it was just you're taking the idea became very distinct. And
Mhm.
sometimes I think a lot of the voices, or a lot of people and like books and places where people are looking to find, not to discover pathways towards like their own personal worth or doing their own work, but it's like some people might lay out a step-by-step path that doesn't quite I don't want to say it doesn't hit, but it's like it's not getting to the root of the thing. And some people might be
Yeah.
talking about the root things without getting step by step about it, or communicating at least even how they got there. But worth it, it feels like this place where that's what, again, you've done that work to like, this is my story. And this was like this experience that I had that could have marked that could have kept me on step one of the
Mhm.
staircase. But like, but this is where I've evolved, which I think
Yeah.
is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a journey, right? And
Hmm.
and that's the tension I feel like I always feel as just like a communicator, or this person who wants to be a thought leader, which I literally hate that term so much, but whatever. Um the tension is, I'm not here to give answers. I'm here to try to push you towards the specific questions. Right? That so it has to be tactical and specific enough to like get someone to think about. It can't be so lofty that you're I remember, and I love him, and he has like transformed so much of my spirituality, but we got to spend a weekend with Richard Rohr, and I remember thinking like, this is like, he was throwing out some knowledge, and I was just like I was like, what? Yeah. But then I'm like, but what does that mean for like today, like going to Trader Joe's? I'm like, how do I bring that down, right? And then like you said, there are people who are just like, here's what you gotta do. You gotta drink this much water. You gotta do this, this, and this. And I'm like, yeah, but what does that do about like my heart, And so trying to be in the middle, especially when our culture feels so binary these days, is like, you know, it's a it's a struggle, but that's where I want to be. Those are the conversations I want to have.
Mm. I appreciate, when you say that, like the middle feels hard. Oh, no, excuse me. The middle is hard. And like we said,
Yeah.
it's hard to be, well, it's easier to be like, oh, this is a box and that's a box. And oh, those people over there think like that. And those people think like that. And to be, it's not even just being people in the middle, but calling people to be like, no, 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 this is not how we're going to exist. This isn't the best
Yeah.
way to exist. It's not representing our best life. So when I think about being in the middle, to me, one of the challenges that I've had lately is trying to invite people into the middle. And it's not even about like their frameworks. So when I introduce you, I'm not
Mhm.
introducing like, this is a gay ex mega pastor with blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Because it's just like
Uh-huh.
heaping these labels on you and like, and it's, but when I don't acknowledge that those are parts of your story that are true, but they don't represent the whole you, it's also doing you a disservice. And
Yeah.
maybe those are different sides of the world of, yeah.
So here's, okay, two things this makes me think of. One is one of my favorite Maya Angelou quotes. She says, "First, recognize that I'm a black woman. Then forget that I'm a black woman." Which means if we want to get to that middle, we have to understand and recognize and acknowledge why we haven't been there. Right. And so it's almost like you have to know the rules to break them. So in Hamilton, right, the musical, right? I
Yeah.
tell me you've listened or
No,
watched it
are you
on
kidding me? My
Disney Plus.
daughters know that
Okay.
by heart. Come on.
They better. Okay. You're
Yeah.
raising good. I'm
Yeah.
proud. I feel like you're doing a great fatherly job. That's all I needed to know to feel like you're an amazing father. Um, so when Hamilton and Alexandra, they're exchanging letters, right? And then there's that one part where it's like, you put the comma after dearest, like my dearest Angelica, right? So it's just like this pivotal moment where she's like, are you catching feelings? And I only know that because of where you put the comma. But it's like that is only impactful because they both knew the rules of where the comma is supposed to be. So when you put it somewhere different, it has this whole new tone to the letter,
Mm,
right? And so trying to bring people to the middle and trying to get beyond labels, to do that we have to understand why it has been so important and impactful, damaging, both, and why those labels have existed, right? And so to say I'm a Black woman, race is a social construct, gender is a social construct, you know what I mean, like, these things aren't real. However, because of the societal impact and the way we have used those things, that has become important to me. And so if we want to get to a place where we can start moving around commas, we can start getting out of boxes, we can start dropping labels, we have to first do the work of understanding, here's why that is important, right? Like, here's why those labels have existed, and here's what they've done. And now if we can first recognize that I'm a Black woman, then we can forget that I'm a Black woman, but we got to go there first. And I think that's some of what's missing is, you know um even this summer, with everything that was happening in our country, and
mm,
sort of people, can't we all just get along, like we're all human? It's like, absolutely we are. Um and we need to do the work to figure out why we haven't seen everyone as human before we can drop those labels and become like one humanity or whatever,
mm,
right? It's like Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Yes, all lives do matter. However, if we can't understand the need to say specifically why Black Lives Matter, we can never get to the place where now collectively we are understanding it all. So I feel like that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is like, yes, I want to drop the labels and I want to do all these things, but if we don't understand why we have those, then the middle doesn't make sense yet, right? If we don't understand why there are sides, then the middle isn't attainable. Um, and I think that's the work that we don't want to do. We're trying to jump to the end, and then when we don't,
but there
it,
is no end. If you haven't done the work, then like we can't get to that reality where people understand each other and dignify one another. I think about like colorblind and people, that
mhm,
kind of whole deal. And it's like, but we want to get to a place where it's almost like we're saying the same thing, but they're described as different realities. Or actually, we wouldn't be saying the same thing, because I don't want to be colorblind. I want to see and
yeah,
acknowledge every color, every experience, every cultural background that someone has had.
yeah,
But that reality, like you might describe that as like not seeing a person's color. I'm describing it as seeing that color and inviting, when everybody's color and story is celebrated and honored and dignified.
mhm,
So back to what you're saying, is like you can't even get to that reality. You think that the way to that reality is like not acknowledging labels and acting like they don't exist. And I'm saying we have to do the work to
y-
understand each other's story and to celebrate that, to come to a place where it feels that way, but everyone
mhm,
is seen and known. That's
absolutely. And I think it's a, we I think the good news is I think we all know those relationships that we have in our life, that we have like acknowledged and accepted our existence to a level that it has moved beyond that, right? Like the friend, you know what I mean? Like it, like Corey, he's one of my best friends, in the world, and he's this tall, straight white guy, and that doesn't mean that like we have just never acknowledged it. And at the same time, we have acknowledged each other's existence so repeatedly and had that as a part of our conversation, that when we just get on the phone and just talk about like marriage, and life, and trying to save money, and our plots and plans for then we can do that because we have done that work. And so it's completely possible, but there's certainly no half stepping, right?
mm,
Past, right, like understanding that I am a gay Black woman, that is important to me, that
mm-hmm,
you understand that about me. That is not all there is to me. That is not going to be the primary thing, but like that has been very important in my life. You as a Black man, if I don't understand that about you, like
Mm,
that has shaped you, right?
mm,
And now we can build a relationship, we could do those things, we could get beyond that to where I'm just like, we're talking about, raising kids or whatever, but we gotta get there.
mm. I think a couple of things that I hear when you share that is, one is about relationship, and
Hmm.
that the relational equity. And it's funny because this is the example of, like, everyone says, like, you don't have a relationship to say that or to do that. You haven't built
Hmm.
that relationship to be able to say that. But what that means is, that's the big picture thing. That mean the granular how to steps of that is what you just said about, like, we have had these conversations and acknowledged it and done the work over and over again, so that we understand one another. That's what it actually looks like. The relationship means we've actually acknowledged the things. And it's not that we've spent time together and talked only about Hamilton every time we
Hmm.
talk, because
Right.
then we don't have the relational equity to talk about marriage or race
Hmm.
or the things that actually matter. That because I think we have a lot of relationships maybe that we're managing on those other levels,
Totally.
where, and that's appropriate.
But I think, and that's the, like, the granular level, and I feel like the bigger cultural level, right, is what we're seeing now is you want to jump into a conversation about race in 2020 or 2021, whatever year it is, they feel the same. But you want to jump into a conversation about race today, but you don't understand the colonization that's happened since 1492. You're going to be short-sighted, right? So one of the things we say a lot, by we I mean me and my dad, um, you can't understand content without first understanding context, right? So you want to understand the content, you better get the context of where that's coming from.
Mhm.
And that's just a lot of the nuance that we're missing in the conversation.
Mhm. So I'm gonna go back to something you said earlier. I agree that we need the context. And I think one of the things that feels difficult as somebody who wants to, I was gonna call you a thought leader, but it would have just been a joke, and
I
now it's on the record anyway. So, but anyway,
know.
as somebody who wants to lead, right? We want to
Mhm.
bring people to the middle, which I love, and we're gonna talk about churches in a second. We want
Mhm.
to bring people to a space where we can acknowledge one another. I think one of the challenges is sometimes the leader may have done the work to desire that and to try and cultivate that, but we're trying to pull people in maybe who have work to do to acknowledge the story, to build their sense of context, um, to live into that reality.
Yeah.
And I guess my question for you is, for maybe you've already answered it, because I want to say, like, how how do I acknowledge Brit first?
Mhm.
And it's just, to me, that's where kinship comes from. The Kinship Collective
Yeah.
is about, we are family. We are all human. We have
True.
all been wounded. We have all have our unique stories, and they need to be celebrated and held. Um, and we need to grow together and transform, and not, not just watch people on the first step of the spiral staircase and be like, oh,
Mhm.
hey there, kid, let me sit down with you. No, let's go.
Yeah.
Um, to some degree, and not non-empathetically. Um, there are some wounds that have people sitting on those steps for a long time, and they don't know how to handle it, and they don't have enough people, and all that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But when I think about, yeah, I don't know, that question about, how do I acknowledge Brit first to start that relationship or that conversation?
I mean, and that's where I don't know that there's a formula, you know what I mean? Or even an answer to that because right, I have friends in my life who we have evolved together, who, like, we were both saying ignorant stuff together. You know what I mean? Like, and both just like and had to, like, one of us may have gone a little faster, and you're like, what? We can't do that anymore. And it's like, no,
Mm,
girl, like, um, and friends who I meet in this stage of life is very different, so I guess my answer is I don't know that there's a formula. I think the best we can do, and
mm,
this is what this I believe this to the core of my heart. If you are in like constant community with your own humanity, then that will fundamentally change the way you interact with every other human.
Mhm.
And like, okay, this morning my wife and I were talking about I'm gonna remember his name in a second. There's a country artist and he's pretty popular. And we actually like some of his music because since we moved to Texas, we're like, let's just dabble, let's try it. Um and he's had an interesting go of things. Like a few months ago, weeks, I don't know, he was supposed to be on Saturday Night Live as like the musical guest. And then this like video surfaces of him like at a party, like a full-on house party, like when he was supposed to be like quarantining. So they're like, sorry, like you can't perform, like you're like literally like on Snapchat at a house party. And so we're like, that was dumb, but okay, whatever. We still playing the bops. And then yesterday, a video got released of him yelling the N-word at a party. And first of all, I'm like, why are you still at parties? But also, why are you yelling the N-word? So anyways, and we're having this conversation, and I'm like, this morning on our way to coffee, we're just like, how would we respond based off of how he responds, right? Of course, he just like came back and was like, I'm so sorry. And you're like, that's fine. What I'm interested in it is I wonder how I would genuinely respond to him coming back like in a month or something and saying, I grew up in the South in a culture where if there weren't Black people around, that was a word that we frequently used because it was a word that was fun to use at parties or we heard it in rap songs. And so I used it all the time. No one around me has ever reprimanded that until this video came out. And now that this video came out, it confused me as to like, I thought that was okay with everyone at the party, but all of a sudden it's not okay. And so I'm realizing that like, I wonder how I would respond to that truly, because I'm like, man, as much as that was the first thing I thought was, I guarantee you no one at that party reprimanded him for that. And I guarantee you he's been at a million parties where that word is thrown around like money, right?
It made me smile because I was wondering how many Black folks are at that party, and I don't know how
None.
groovy they.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
Yeah, it was just neither here nor there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm assuming, I guess in my mind there are zero.
Yeah.
Um and right, and how would that change the conversation if I can get in touch with the things that I used to say, like that's so gay, or oh my god, so many words. But yeah, I wonder how. So it pushed me to remind myself of my own journey and evolution. um he didn't take that route, and that's fine, and who knows what he will become. But like, like I want, it's hard, but I want the more honest conversations. Like I want white folks to be like, no, sorry, like I have said these things and they've been jokes and everyone around me has laughed. Like I didn't know it was not okay. Do you know what I mean? Like I want some honest, like
I,
that
I
was normal.
yeah, I don't know. I think, and to me, I feel honestly the same. I'm like, even if he did, then I would be empathetic, and it would show that he, it means a lot more than just like I'm so sorry, like the PR thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But to actually communicate the vulnerability and to share his story of why that even, I think that would build empathy. To me, that makes me think of the racial reconciliation. I'm trying to think of the word down in South Africa. um
Oh, oh my gosh.
yeah.
Truth and
Truth and
what's it? Truth
reconciliation.
and Reconciliation
Yes.
Project or something? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
um
here's what's interesting, Mark. So let me ask you. Okay, because here's what this whole thing makes me think of. You know that country music, like, is steeped in levels of racism that run so deep. And so it's interesting to me to watch the country music community be like, oh, we're taking a song off the radio, we're doing this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's the problem, is that we're upset about this video. We need to be upset about what's creating a culture in which this man feels so comfortable doing this at a party because of this box, this worldview, this thing that you created. And so, is the problem him saying the N-word at a party? Absolutely. Is that the biggest, deepest problem? No. What created that? He is the flower. We need to be talking about the
Mm,
roots and the
yeah.
fertilizer and the water and the
Mm,
dirt. You know what I mean? And
absolutely.
that's the frustrating part to me sometimes about like cancel culture or these things, is like someone gets caught and we're like, boop, like bye. Great.
It
But where
under
did they come from?
yeah, under it undercuts our ability to evolve together because we just erase that thing. But
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it was just a symptom of something. We need to follow the root of the flower, go all the way down, and
Yes.
figure out
I'm
why
like,
does this
great,
guy, yeah,
take your songs off the radio, do what you need to do. Like I'm here for it, but then what? What are you gonna do to keep hymns from just sprouting, right?
yeah,
And it, you know,
mhm.
there's another one of him, you know.
Yes, to say the
Yeah.
least. So when you think about starting something like churchish and creating this space, and this feels like, it just feels like to me what I want Kinship Collective to also be. But
Yeah.
some of my first conversations with people about kinship, and people were saying, well, what will it look like when somebody, when the stories are, when it's damaging, when that person's story is damaging to another person in the room, what does that feel like and look like? When you think about church-ish, we'll say, and
Mhm.
you have this exact country music star in the room, and you're in the room, and Rosie's in the room,
Mhm.
and people talk to me about cultivating that space. So talk to us a little bit about that space, and then,
Yeah.
and then that the iron sharpening iron, the sparks
Mhm.
that fly and in that process.
Yeah, it's a good question, man. Well, the idea and the concept of it came from a few places. One, I've had the privilege of leaving the megachurch world to New Abbey, which I'm like, if there's anyone in the world who is trying to reimagine, reclaim their Christian faith, there's not a better place in the entire freaking planet. I believe that with my whole heart, than New Abbey. And since my own life and spirituality has sort of evolved, I was like, man, I miss that conversation. I miss asking those questions. I miss getting around a room with people, having a conversation like this, and then being able to be like, what did that make you guys think of? Like, what are we feeling here? Like, how does this feel? Um, and I wanted to do that outside of a box, right? So that's why we call it church-ish, because it's like church in that, like, we're gonna talk and share stories and stuff, but you can be Muslim, you can be atheist, you can be nothing, you can be recovering evangelical, you can be anything you want. Um, and to answer your question, what happens if this guy, I can't remember his name, the country artist, if he comes and it's me, it's Rosie, it's the Black Panther Party, that is the fun part that I don't know. Um, and so the goal with churches is I want to try to have conversations like this, and I want to carefully and craftfully pose questions, more questions than answers. Um, that hopefully, if all those people were in a group, it would enable them to have a conversation, to think more deeply about the way. Listen, here's what I believe to be true about forgiveness. I don't think forgiveness is necessarily something that happens always person to person. It's like internal, like it's something you cultivate. So
Mm.
being, I'll say it this way, let's say you were really hurt by church, um and the leaders of a church, and forgiveness for me doesn't mean you go back to leaders of the church and you say, hey man, like I know you had a hard time, I had a hard time too, like it's okay, water under the bridge. To me, forgiveness is you now getting involved in New Abbey and opening yourself up to Corey and saying, although there was a wound from this particular person, this particular place, I am open to the reality that not all people and not all places will be like that, right? So it's
Mm,
more this like lived into reality, in my opinion.
mm-hmm.
And so with that, getting this many different people in a room asking questions and having conversations like this, I hope opens the door to forgiveness, to interact with someone and be like, okay, although white people have been trifling in my life, I'm open to the reality that you might not be as trifling, right? Or
Mm,
whatever the case may be. And it'll be interesting. So we're just doing, I'm just doing like 3 weeks, and gonna see what it becomes, what it's like, feel it out.
mm-hmm.
And so we're gonna have conversations about like gray area, like the middle. That'll be the conversation tonight. Actually, is gonna be the first one. So we're gonna talk about race, but through the lens of talking about power.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then Sammy and I are gonna tag team. We're gonna talk about relationships. And so I don't know. I'm as interested as you are
Mm-hmm.
to see what it becomes, but I'm willing to just start.
Yeah. I I love that. And I think that's true to who I know you to be. Started trusting, like for me, I trust in you and your maturity to navigate the space. And then, but for me, that feels like that conversation um around relational equity or relational capacity. Like I think about a bridge
Hmm.
and the relationship, like how much have you built to hold how much weight? Uh,
Yeah.
and then, but to me, that space becomes a place where you as like the, as a culture's creator, you are embodying the maturity to hold the different stories and
Hmm.
asking questions in a way that allows people from different perspectives to enter in. And you're inviting people into this thing, so it just feels like the space where that that relational equity and that forgiveness can happen, because it's like, oh, now I'm, because you've had caricatures in your head about what this country music person or what this Black Panther Party person or what this
Hmm.
Muslim person, or and all these pictures that we've had shoved in our faces about these things, caricatures.
Hmm.
And when you create the space where people can do the vulnerable and honest thing, then it's no longer that picture that I had painted in my head. Then it becomes, it's not an idea. Now this is a human being who I see in
Hmm.
front of me on my Zoom screen, who, like, it's just
Yeah.
different, and it creates empathy and connection.
And to be real, like you have to be ready for that. And you have to want that. Like, you know, this past summer is a time where I sat with Rosie, and we were like, I just don't want to be around white people. Like I was like hurt, angry, certainly like experiencing so many emotions where I'm like, I'm not in the mood to build bridges right now. I'm not in the emotional place. I'm not in the mental. It's just funny because me and Rosie are both married to white people, but aside from them, we were like, that's it. That's it. Our list. And I think those times are important, and it's important to have every season of your life can't be about building bridges. I think there's a sociologist, and she says we need two types of relationships. We need bonding circles, and we need bridging circles, right? So um,
Mm-hmm.
if I went to an all male college, right? I don't know why I would, but that would be fun. I'm trying to have, but like I would need a girls' night. Like I would need it, just to feel like, hey, let's talk about, getting a period. I don't know, whatever. Um, and so there there is that, and I think we just need to be honest with ourselves of like what I'm inviting people into with this churchish space. If you're not into that, don't don't force it. Like if what you need is to still be around Christians, but still try to figure out how to reclaim that, do that. You know, if what you need is still this bonding circle, then find that. Like I don't think that everything is for everybody, and I feel personally at a place where I'm like, I want to push these boundaries. I want to get everyone into the gray. Like I want to get rid of these lines. Like let's freaking do it. And if that's not where you are, girl, you don't have to come. And I won't be offended by that, because I understand that, you know, every season is different, right? And so my hope is that if you're a person who you're like, I can't even get beyond the caricature of this kind of person in my head, then maybe that's not the space for you yet. And that's okay.
I love that. My mind, I want to look at some scripture together. And we first started talking about a scripture in Galatians where Paul talks about like there's these boundaries don't exist anymore because of Christ.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about that, but I'm gonna actually give you a choose your own adventure. Oh,
Okay.
the first time ever on Kinship Collective.
Wow. Honored.
No, but the one that came to my mind in the process of this is, before you can get to that place, like you talked about in the last couple of chapters of Worth It, available now, and all blah, 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 is that our inability to hold our own story. So like if I'm still, which is, it's funny because even as I try to say it out loud, I'm like, yeah, I'm still judging myself too though. But as I'm healing and like judging myself, if I'm still like super critical of my own story, not able to accept it or hold it, surrender to it, then it's gonna be hard for me to walk into a church age space. Like that's not the space for me yet. Feels like. So pick your own adventure. Galatians 3, or when Jesus says, "Don't judge others, because the same judgment that you give to others is like the judgment you're going to experience." Which one feels more true to where we're at right now?
I would like to talk about both of them.
Oh, I love it. I should have anticipated that.
Because
That's a Brit answer.
I think they are very connected. I think they're very, very connected.
Yeah.
Here's why.
Yeah.
So you know, don't judge yourself. That's how you're gonna be judged. I mean, don't,
Yeah.
whatever, you know.
Here, let me read it. Because
Okay, yeah,
I'm with you. We'll read that one, and then if we make it to the Galatians one before time is out, we'll read that one too.
We'll make it.
Oh, come on. All right, Matthew 7. Jesus is here. This is like this part where Jesus is framing these things that make the reality where there is no us and them. This is the reality where there is no male, female, Jew, Gentile, gay, straight, Republican, Democrat. This is a kingdom reality where everyone is honored and dignified, and their story is held and cherished. And every tear that drops from these people's eyes, there's this reality that, oh, God cares about everything that matters to me and cares about me deeply. So Jesus is painting the picture of some of the principles of that reality and some of the practices of that reality on the side of this mountain. And so Jesus says this: "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye and not the log that's in your own eye? How can you say to your sister, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own? You hypocrite, first take out the log of your own eye, then you'll see clearly to take out the speck from your sister's eye." So we read longer than that first couple, but I think it's all the same thing.
Yeah, and gosh, one of my favorite things about being at New Abbey and the season there was being able to, it's one thing to feel like, scripture was this thing and it was kind of scary and it hurt me, I'm just never gonna look at it again, to be like, oh, that was just because of the way it was presented to me. This thing is amazing. And so what is true? And this is connecting and bringing in another piece of scripture. But when we talk about, love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the fundamental truth in that and in this scripture is that we give out what we experience ourselves. Meaning, like, you will love people in the way that you love yourself. Meaning, if you are a little judgy so and so, walking around talking about, ooh, her weave is messed up, ooh, her shoes don't fit, ooh, she don't act right, ooh, she can't do this, that's because that is what you are experiencing. You only are going to notice You're only going to notice the specks in people's eyes because it's reflecting, because you know what to look
Mm.
for, because you are so deeply experiencing it. You got so much wood in your own eye that you can now see all you're looking for, and you see wood, 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 wood. So if I'm looking at myself and I'm critique, when I look out into the world, all I see is critique. So we literally put out what we internalize, what we feel. So if I'm even a little bit judgy, and I catch myself all the time, because sometimes I'll be driving and I'll just be driving and I'll see people down the street. I'll be like, those shoes are whack. That hat is whack. That car is busted. And then I'm like, that is always a sign for me to be like, whoa, what is going on? Like, what do I not feel confident today? Like, do I not feel good about my body? Do I feel insecure? Like, what? That is always my tell,
Wow.
because what flows out is whatever you're giving in. So when it says, like, judge not, you be judged more highly, or whatever the wording is, absolutely. What
Mm.
if I find myself giving these little critiques talking about, ooh, her shoes are busted? But the narrative inside myself is, you're not good enough, you won't be good enough, you're not good, and everyone knows it, and you're just faking it, and you're it's way worse than whatever I said to her. Like, that's what I'm feeling. It's like we talked earlier, and the flower that comes out is me being like, oh
Huh?
girl, get your life right, when really my internal monologue is like detrimental, right? And so we then have an opportunity to say, like, man, if all I'm seeing is specks in people's eyes, that's because it's reflecting off the log in mine,
Mm.
you know. um and I think that's here is how I feel like it connects to the Galatians passage. um so my favorite people in the world to be around right now is everyone who is pushing and blurring the lines of gender. I am here for it in all the ways. And I've noticed. So my wife and I, we're obsessed with RuPaul's Drag Race. If you haven't watched RuPaul's Drag Race, there are 13 seasons, so you can definitely have all the time you want to catch up. And why I currently think that drag queens are the most important people in our entire society. Um, when we are confronted with someone who is living a level of freedom that we felt like we could not attain, it makes us both uncomfortable and angry. And working through that is one of the most important things we can do. The people who lost their minds when I came out, I'm always like, that, not that they're gay, but I feel like they, you know what I mean? Like, that it was this reaction of, like, I didn't get to have that, so you, sure, that you don't get to have it, right? People,
Mm.
I have a friend right now, who's going through a divorce, and the level of anger from people, which is like, you just stick it out and you make it work. It's like, oh, did you want this reality, but you couldn't have it? And so my freedom is now threatening to you. My freedom is harmful to you. My freedom brings up all these things to you because you still feel trapped in that box. So when we're watching these drag queens strut, and
Mm-hmm.
work that runway. I'm like, this is amazing. Like there's a part of me that's like, is this weird? No, this isn't weird. Why would this be weird? And I'm like, oh, beans, like they are living a level of freedom that says, I am this man and I got a full beard. Give me 2 hours and watch me come out here looking like somebody's pageant queen. And it is like, it's so important. I think for all of us to be pushed and pushed and pushed to understand that someone's freedom is all of our freedom. And if we can't celebrate that, then
Mm-hmm.
we need to search for the ways in which we still feel oppressed. And I think gender expression and identity is so visual that it gives us such an amazing opportunity to find those places, right? And so at the end of every single episode of RuPaul, have you ever seen Drag Race?
I haven't. I'm gonna watch
Okay,
it though. That's my commitment.
yeah, I'm gonna tell you my favorite queens. I'll tell you my favorite season. Season 10 has like the most black queens of all the seasons, so I would start there because it's my favorite. But at the end of every single episode of 13 seasons, RuPaul says the same thing at the end of every episode.
Mm.
And she says, if you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you gonna love somebody else? And then she says, can I get amen? And all the queens say amen. And it's this beautiful moment, but every single episode, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you gonna love somebody else? So, meaning, if you can't get the judgment, the internal monologue out, then you can't get to the place where there's neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, Gentile. If you can't get that out of your head, you cannot express and experience this true love of humanity that like shows up in all of these beautiful different ways.
And anytime you see that reality, it will always provoke the places in you that are still caged up, bound up, wanting to be free, maybe not even knowing how to be liberated.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at, and I think about just the places and the ways that people viscerally respond, that's really interesting. I mean, it's symptomatic. It is the fruit of the root. But what's beautiful about that is that Jesus is constantly pointing at like freedom and like that
Yep.
full wholeness and healing and
Mm-hmm.
shalom, like experiencing everything you're designed to and the ways you're designed to. Um, and just how like we would just constantly be provoked by anything that, and it feels, you know, when you were talking about the specs and the logs, it just made me think about like the themes, like if it
Mm-hmm.
is like fashion or body image, you know, the fruit may look in that line. Like for me, money is
Yeah.
like, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
when somebody's just big balling and I'm like, I don't know. I don't even know how to identify if I feel like jealous or if it's, you know, whatever ways that those is provoking for me, where I'm like, I don't feel as free as that. And some of that is like
Mm-hmm.
fake. And that's not true freedom or wholeness either. Like that's not going to come
Mm-hmm.
from money. Back to like what you said and in your book about my own, like my story, to settle in and surrender to my story. And then
Mm-hmm.
also settle in and like you talked about living as big as you can in your story.
Mm-hmm. I think you hit the nail right on the head, right? Like it's the ways in which we have to notice, right? We have to be aware and notice like what are those moments where you get like mm, you know, like what is that, right? And that's where you get to start. The thing about Jesus, um you know, that I love is I feel like he was always pointing towards whatever made those particular people most uncomfortable. So it wasn't about the specific, like, you know, these are the people I came for. It was like he would enter a space and be like, who do y'all hate the most? Oh, that girl? Yeah, she's the one then. Okay, this town, who y'all hate the most? That leper? Okay, then he's the one. Okay, who do y'all hate the most here? That
Mm-hmm.
person? That's who I'm gonna get. Yeah. You know, so it wasn't about um, you know, but I think there
Wow.
was a part of him that was like, oh, who do y'all not see here? That's who I see.
And it's symptomatic of who you are and what needs to be dealt with in this space.
Absolutely. Right. And so when we take our own inventory, it's like if Jesus was to come into our life, who is the person that he would be like, oh, okay, then that's who I'm with. Are you still with me? And it's like, dang.
Sheesh. That's really, really powerful to me. That really moves
I
me.
know. I wish I didn't even say that because I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, it's like
there's so much more to go. Maybe I'm still on the first step of the spiral staircase.
Look, and man, I don't know. I feel super encouraged in this current state of life that I'm like, everything is an opportunity, and it's hard not to be like, man, I'm nowhere near where Brene Brown is, but I'm not where I was, and how do I just like let that be true? A couple days ago, Sam and I had a really hard conversation, like out of nowhere. That'd be happening. Like it's a Saturday, and y'all just making breakfast. All of a sudden, you're like,
yes.
Why am I crying?
Wait, time out. Now.
Right. This went from bacon to
yeah.
And at the end of it, which I love being married to her so much, but she was like, that was hard. And I think that we needed to have that conversation today. And I'm grateful for that. And I was like, yes, I will. I mean, that's true. Like, you know what I mean? Like that wasn't easy. And we, talked about things and cried and felt vulnerable. And I think she's right. That needed to happen. Right. And if you can see things in that way, it will change the work a lot.
Everything as an opportunity.
Yeah.
And we don't get to choose when the opportunities come or how they come, but when we feel those visceral responses to things, to surrender and to participate as much as possible and ask the questions of, what is this revealing in me? Why is this so difficult right now? So hard to surrender control, or the beautiful breakfast moment I thought we were here for, and then to walk away and say, oh no, but this is what that moment was for, and it's even better than the perfect breakfast or whatever. Beans, thank you so much. I appreciate you so
Mark.
much. Oh, Beans.
Oh, Mark.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, I think a lot of things. Okay, so the first person to comment on our YouTube video will get one of these sent to them. I'll work it out with you. The first person to comment on the Apple podcast, you'll get it, and the Spotify podcast, I'll send it to you. It is simply worth it. No, it's mad worth your time. It's beautiful, and like the people around you, you will show it better. Tap in with Brit. You can follow her on Instagram. Check out BritBarron.com. Brit, thank you so much for your time. All this conversation centers around the fact that all stories, your story matters, and we can celebrate it. Even if no matter where you feel at on that spiral staircase towards growth and maturity and evolution, we can celebrate your story. We can hold some of those hard places with you, and grow together and try to propel you towards the vision and where life is for you, and to look at some of the roots and all that stuff together. But you have to know that you are deeply loved, you are deeply worth it, and we are family, and that's just the way it is. So much love, y'all. Till next time. Peace.
We are family.